Perfection, Nevada. A dusty one-horse town in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place that doesn't even appear on most maps. But in the summer of 1990, it was the location for one of the best horror comedy movies ever made. I'm talking, of course, about the cult classic Tremors, starring Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward as a pair of clueless handymen that end up fighting an invasion by a group of underground monsters. And if that sounds goofy as fuck, well, that's because it is. Tremors is kind of a playful homage to the classic monster movies of the 1950s, only it's been given a more contemporary edge and a decent bit of tongue-in-cheek humour. And the result is pure gold. The movie begins by introducing us to our two main characters, Val and Earl, who eke out a living doing odd jobs in the tiny desert town of Perfection. It's a pretty shitty existence, literally in some cases, and after one particularly tough day, they decide to move on to greener pastures. Unfortunately, on their way out of town, they run into a local resident holed up in a tower, who literally stayed there until he died from dehydration. But what the hell was he hiding from? Before long, more locals start disappearing, and every time they try to leave, something always happens to force them back. When the only road out of town gets blocked by a landslide, they begin to realise that something out there is hunting them. But what exactly is it, and where is it coming from? Holy shit, man, it's an underground monster! But what should we call this thing?
Graboid! That's it, Graboid!
Ah, perfect. Nice one, Walter. So the basic gist here is that there's 4 of these things roaming around the valley. They can move quickly through the loose desert soil without anyone seeing them, but for obvious reasons they can't pass through solid rock. They have no eyes, so they hunt by listening for the vibrations of their prey on the surface. The only ways to avoid them are to stay off the ground and stay quiet. So the second half of the film becomes a kind of action survival story, as the remaining characters try to fend off the Graboids and look for a way to escape. But the Graboids themselves are surprisingly quick to adapt, and every time the humans come up with a new plan, they find a way to get around it. And of course, as always, it comes down to one final epic showdown. What a fun, enjoyable movie Tremors is, managing to strike a perfect balance between horror movie, monster flick and buddy comedy, with a decent bit of action thrown in for good measure. More than that, it's a really good example of tight, efficient screenwriting, clocking in at just 96 minutes, but somehow never feeling rushed or contrived. I would genuinely struggle to find a single wasted scene or piece of dialogue, a single flabby edit, a joke that fails to land, or even a set piece that feels unnecessary. Even seemingly unimportant things that are set up early in the movie often have big repercussions later.
Hey guys, listen, herring going out. What do you think?
Could be. Catch you later, Chang.
Turn it off!
It's funny to think that Val and Earl inadvertently got Walter killed by refusing to fix his refrigerator when they had the chance. Remember when setup and payoff was still a thing in movies? Each encounter with the Graboids tells the audience a little bit more about them, and I love the idea of an enemy you can't see coming, randomly snatching people and dragging them underground before they even know what's happening. It's like Jaws, except the desert has become the ocean, and some flimsy buildings are your only hope of salvation. And like any good monster movie, it's smart enough to keep its enemy hidden for as long as possible, allowing the audience to make their own guesses at what it might be. But once it's time to reveal them, the script wisely moves away from horror and into action survival mode, with gunfights, explosions and hastily improvised escape plans. And because the script takes the time to explain the Graboids' capabilities and limitations, you understand exactly what's going on. Characters make smart, logical decisions to combat the threat as they understand it, instead of panicking and doing ridiculously stupid stuff just to keep the plot moving. And of course, the movie never loses its wicked sense of humour. Tremors takes itself just seriously enough to keep you invested in what's happening and avoid becoming a total farce, but it never becomes so heavy and serious that you get bogged down in it. Even more gruesome moments have a kind of dark humour to them, mostly because of the amazing performances from Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward. The chemistry between Val and Earl is pitch perfect. Val's young, cocky and full of himself, while Earl is old and grumpy and fancies himself as the brains of the operation. But really, they're just as clueless as each other and completely unprepared for what they're up against.
We can make it! We can make it!
Fortunately, they're balanced out by Rhonda, a grad student studying seismic events in the region. She's smart and resourceful, she provides a useful insight into the threat they're facing and actually gets them out of a few sticky situations while they're busy arguing with each other. It's funny and it makes sense in context without cheapening their characters. Rhonda neatly complements them instead of undermining them. Take note, modern Hollywood. And of course, there's Bert, the gung-ho survivalist, just itching to shoot things. Man, you can tell this movie was made before the Cold War ended.
Yeah, Bert. The way you worry, you're gonna have a heart attack before you get a chance to survive World War III.
He comes across as kind of an asshole at first, and clashes with Val and Earl when their plans don't pan out. And if this movie was made today, he'd probably get exposed as some cowardly pussy, or get killed in the middle of some self-aggrandizing rant for the sake of a cheap laugh.
Bert, cut it out!
I think I scared him.
Instead, he turns out to be a valuable ally, and actually manages to kill one of the Graboids that breaks into his basement, in a scene that's basically several minutes of pure gun porn. And it's awesome! I love how he's got a fucking elephant gun on standby.
Broke into the wrong goddamn rec room, didn't you, you bastard?
For a low-budget horror comedy made in the early 90s, Tremors is far better than it has any right to be, delivering laughs, scares, and action exactly when it needs to. The special effects are used sparingly, but they're all competently done, apart from this really shitty looking composite shot. And the Graboids themselves are a fun new slant on the monster genre that remain pretty mysterious even by the end of the movie. Where exactly do they come from, and why have they never been encountered before? I don't fucking know, and nor do I particularly care. Because in this case, it's really not important to the story. Tremors is all about having fun with the scenario and characters it's created, rather than answering big questions and world building. Speaking of which, the characters are all clearly defined, well developed, and played by perfectly cast actors, so you know exactly who everyone is and what they're about within the first 10 minutes. And more importantly, you actually care whether or not they make it. Tremors wasn't a big hit at the cinema, but it became a cult classic on home media as people began to appreciate it more and more over the years. Yeah, it spawned about half a dozen direct-to-video sequels, and even a TV show, all of which are probably best forgotten. But the original movie that started it all is still an absolute gem that doesn't just hold its own against similar movies today, and actually puts most of them to shame. And if somehow you haven't seen it yet, trust me, it's 96 minutes that you won't regret investing. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.